So I'm Tessa Kelly, as mentioned, and I'm going to be talking about corrections and constructive criticism. So to start out with, I'm really nervous. I'm afraid that you all will say something mean about me on Twitter after this talk, or maybe even worse, during. And that's a part of what makes it scary to come up and present. Even worse than that, though, is if you all were to present like really solid critiques of what I'm presenting here today, that I'll add up in my head to mean that this talk failed, that I failed, that I am a failure. And also, kind of as a side note, I do feel like giving a presentation or talking about constructive criticism is kind of an invitation for people to practice constructive criticism. So please feel free, but that is a feeling that I'm experiencing. Sometimes I'm also afraid at work, when I'm on call or when I'm working with something new. I'm lucky, though, that I have a working environment where it's OK to make mistakes. And I get a lot of support, whether I need it or when I ask for it, even if I don't actually need it. And the environment's really blame-free and learning-focused. I started at NoRedInk 3 years ago as a junior engineer. And having that environment has made a huge difference to my ability to progress as a software engineer. As a junior engineer, even the idea of criticism can be really stressful and really scary. Maybe you think that you should pair with a more experienced engineer, because that's a great way to grow and to learn. But there's this underlying current of, will I be exposed as a fraud? Will people think I'm incompetent? Will I fail? Will this really experienced engineer, whom I admire, whom I respect, who I want to be more like, say that my code is bad or ugly or spaghetti? And we have those feelings, even though we know that pairing is one of the best ways to learn new programming languages for anyone. It's one of the best ways to be exposed to new programming tools, new techniques, new paradigms. But our fear of other people's perception of us, their opinion on us, can make us retreat. So we decide, OK, I'm going to learn on my own. I'm going to wait to show my work. I'm going to wait to show anyone what I've been working on until I'm really confident that it's great, until I'm really sure that it's going to be good and they're going to like it. But how do we know when to be confident in what we've done if we're not really actively engaging with other engineers, if we don't know what the bar is or what is good? So we practice in private, alone, subject only to our own opinion and only to our own scale of what things should be. We hide. Does this sound familiar, maybe? Hopefully. Maybe it didn't, but maybe this will. So maybe we're more experienced. Maybe we have a lot of confidence in our ability. Occasionally still feeling some imposter syndrome. But mostly we're afraid of making a poorly thought through comment in a meeting, afraid that people will think that we've said something silly. We're intimidated in stepping out of the areas that we do know well. Or maybe we're just afraid to pair with this junior engineer because we're afraid that we'll hurt their feelings, that we won't be able to guide them to write better code, that we won't be able to suggest things in an effective way. So how can we grow? How can we collaborate? How can we learn from each other and help each other to learn? And how can we become a stronger team? So I tend to think in analogy, as I think many people do. So I think back to what I already know and to what I've already seen. So I think in stories, I think about language, I think about communication. So I think about ballet. So in ballet, each class follows a really strict structure. There's like a clear process for how to improve. The teacher will prepare combinations. The teacher will tell you the combinations. The teacher will say, do the combinations. And then the teacher will tell you what's wrong about the combinations. She'll offer a correction. Students in a ballet class are expected to learn from each other's mistakes. They're expected to learn from each other's successes and failures and the corrections that the teacher gives to them. So maybe this teacher is saying, Lucy, don't tuck your pelvis. That doesn't mean that I'm doing the right thing with my bones, that I'm lined up correctly. That means I should think about how I'm lining myself up. Similarly, if the teacher says, class, look at what Lucy is doing, I should look. I should learn from what she's doing, whether what she's doing is correct or incorrect. Improving at ballet is a question of listening, of remembering what people have said and trying to apply what people have said. It's also learning by example and seeing what people are doing well. Working hard without applying corrections, without applying the things that we're trying to learn, gets you somewhere, but it doesn't get you good ballet technique. So the question is, why would we expect non-physical pursuits to be any different? Why would we expect for working hard on its own to make us better programmers? But there's kind of another question there. What does better mean? In ballet, as in programming, there's a question of taste. Who determines what it means to dance correctly? Who determines what good code is? So there's some stuff that we can agree on. If you want to jump high off the ground, you got to push through your knees and off the ground. But if jumping high were the only goal, then high jumpers, ballet dancers, basketball players, other folks that I haven't mentioned would be in direct competition with each other, and that's just not the world we live in. So who gets to define what the right way to jump is? In a ballet class, it's really clear. The teacher. The teacher says what's right. Dancers adjust to the teacher. For programmers, we also adjust our technique depending on the code base that we're working in. Maybe in some projects, we use inline styles. Maybe in other projects, that would be heresy and use style sheets. But corrections on taste can be hard to hear. A substitute teacher, when I was 8, told me to stop being so dramatic. So I threw myself to the ground and said, no, just kidding. But I was trying to be expressive, and it came across as overwrought. And that correction was hard to hear. It felt really personal. It felt really about me, about my artistry. And I was embarrassed, and I didn't know her. She was a substitute, and it was just hard to hear. And it would have been more effective if she had been more specific and not focused on her assumption of what I was trying to do, but focus on the output, on what it looked like. So maybe stop flapping your arms about would have been more helpful, or to show more specifically what she wanted. Similarly, sometimes we give feedback like, this is unnecessarily complex. And that's kind of vague and a matter of perspective. Maybe it would be more helpful to offer some alternatives, or more helpful to say specifically what makes it hard for you to hold in your brain. Sometimes feedback is useful. Stop being so dramatic was useful to me. It just wasn't in the manner or given in the style that I would have liked it to have been. But I did feel like I needed to deal with that feedback anyway. So this is a picture of a handout that I got from the summer program at my ballet studio in Albuquerque, Hayden School of Ballet, a very long time ago. And I'm going to read a couple of things here. Most beginners make the mistake of being afraid to make mistakes. You'll be tempted to hide, but you cannot be non-committal. Either you do it or you don't. There's nothing to be embarrassed or apologetic about. Nobody expects you to get it right the first time. Only when you make clear mistakes can they see where you need help. A correction is a belief in your ability to progress. Good criticism is not a marker of disapproval. It doesn't mean failure. It doesn't mean poorly done. It doesn't mean bad job. It means I believe in you. It means you can do this. Here's a tip for how. So if someone posts on Twitter that this talk was not worth their time, that'll kind of hurt my feelings. That won't really help me grow. But a real critique, like stop doing that weird hand thing, could mean that you care about how I do. Could mean that you think that I belong up here and I belong on at other conferences in the future. You think I can do conference talks. I can take your thoughtful criticism as an affirmation, which is easier said than done. Too much criticism and a person definitely stops wanting to do. And that brings us to the question of, like, what feedback do we value? What feedback do we want? What feedback do we want to solicit, to invite into our hearts, into our like pre-sleep brains that just keep rolling over stuff from the day? As engineers, we get a ton of feedback. Some of it is maybe obvious, some of it's maybe not, like usage and throughput and exceptions and like roll bar logs and such. What did people click on? Did this work? But those are all more or less in the category of like how high off the ground did you jump? There's also retrospective notes, like notes that you're colleagues might have for you at the end of a sprint, mid-year, end-of-year review, notes from your manager and one-on-ones, casual feedback. There's so much feedback. But the feedback that's most helpful for me on the daily is the feedback I get on my pull requests. Some questions that I ask myself as I'm anticipating the feedback or as I'm reading through the feedback. Am I waiting for them to sign off on my work? To say, yeah, this meets our bar? Am I trying to get my code and my changes in? And that's it. Like, that's my goal. I want my code in the thing. If that's the case, then my coworker is an obstacle. They're in the way. They're in my way. They're obstructing progress. They're obstructing the team. They're obstructing me. They're holding us all back, and they're a problem. If my goal is just to get my code in, I want a lax reviewer. I want someone who skims. I want someone who doesn't visualize other approaches, who doesn't have design suggestions for me as an engineer. If my goal is just to get my code in, to get that green stamp of approval that says, you can merge this now, I'm, allegorically speaking, staying home from class and just showing up for performances. I'm rejecting anything that I might learn from my peer. Alternatively, I could try to start a conversation with my peer. I could tell my coworker a story through my commits and try to communicate clearly where I made choices and what I considered, and ask them to do the same for me in their feedback. What if they don't engage with my PR? What if they say something harsh or poorly phrased? Those are real risks. People will give feedback that's not helpful some of the time. Internalized criticism can be harmful. It can damage our sense of belonging. Power dynamics and trust really matter here. Do you trust that the feedback that you get is about the work that you do and not about who you are? Can you trust that other people's biases aren't playing into what they're telling you to change or what they're asking you to do? Who do they want you to be, and is that who you want to be too? Are all questions to consider. From the other side, as the reviewer, I also have goals. Maybe I'm thinking, this PR is dangerous. It could break everything. This cannot go in. This cannot go in. I can't even consider thinking about why this person might want this. Or maybe I'm thinking, what's the company style guide say? Maybe I want to prove that I'm detail-oriented. Maybe I want to show this person making the PR that I'm a good reviewer, that I'll find small mistakes. Maybe I want to reject their PR just to support my own image of myself. Ideally speaking, though, neither of those are the reasons that we give a review. Ideally speaking, we're giving a review. We're acting as the teacher. We're offering suggestions. We're the student looking to grow by example. We're like, what's that cool thing? That's cool. I want to do that. We're the seeker of knowledge. I've never heard of that. How do I do that too? What is this? Where do I go to learn more about this? And the holder of knowledge, offering options that the code author might not know about. Not the gatekeeper. And I shouldn't be seeking to prove anything. So personally, I believe that I can apply ballet to my engineering work and engineering work to my ballet. But that may not work for everybody. Power dynamics exist. Untrustworthy people exist. And our ability to trust is like a totally separate category as well. And I personally feel really lucky that I've had these patterns that can help me succeed. And I hope that some of them would be helpful for you all as well. So in ballet, I move through combinations, taking care to be musical. I stitch together seemingly complex phrases of motion that are really just small steps. It's all just small steps. I apply what my teacher tells me, and I try to grow. In programming, I move through commits, taking care to be meticulous, trying to tell a story. I stitch together seemingly complex user flows that are really just ifs and else's and bools and such. I apply the changes my PR reviewer recommends. I learn, and hopefully I grow. And hopefully I continue growing to be less defensive, more open, and more brave. Thank you.
Thank you.